I'm Michelle Kelly, and I'm the head of Los Angeles Rabbit Foundation here in Los Angeles, California. We focus on education, spay and neuter of domestic rabbits, working with animal shelters, and rehabilitating rabbits and finding them homes. We're a fairly small group. We started out really based, again, with mostly shelter volunteers, and now we're mostly foster based. And so we typically have 50 foster volunteers at any given time, plus we have an additional 62. Well, yeah, it's grown by a little more than that. Volunteers, they come and go, but well, oddly enough, I have a similar story to many people. One of my ex-boyfriends got me a rabbit as a gift, which you don't ever want to do. And that rabbit was from a pet store, which you also don't want to do. And he was a special needs bunny. But I like to think of myself as someone who researches things and tries to become educated if I'm not. And so I immediately went to my local library and read up on rabbits and found out that rabbits need to be neutered, that they need another friend if they'll get along with another rabbit, and that they live better indoors than outdoors. And so I started making changes in my life. I got the bunny out of the cage into a free roam situation, and then I went to my local animal shelter to get the bunny a friend because I found out that animal shelters have rabbits. In fact, rabbits are the third most commonly relinquished animal in shelters in the United States after dogs and cats. And so I said, well, I want to, save one of those rabbits. I don't want a healthy rabbit to be put to sleep. Rabbits are enchanting creatures. They're kind of a cross between having a little deer and a cat or something domestic, because on the one hand, they're domestic animals, but on the other hand, they retain some of the instincts of their wild ancestors. So it's a little bit like having a pet woodland creature in your home. I saw a need that wasn't being filled, and I started helping out the rabbits there. And I noticed that a lot of them were being put to sleep because they didn't have the space. And so I worked on creating a separate space for the rabbits. And then I worked with the staff, and we agreed that if there was space, and that if I bought equipment, if I bought some big cages, tried to get the cages bigger, because we're in Los Angeles, real estate is expensive, and so the bunnies in the animal shelter were not going to have pens. They were not going to each have their own room. They were going to be in cages. And so it's all about doing damage control, frankly. It's all about making a bad situation better. And so we improved conditions, and we got to 100% placement of those rabbits. And then I started sharing this information, and we increased adoption rates in other shelters. But then I realized how many rabbits are being dumped outside of the shelters, in neighborhoods, and in parks where, they're basically just feeding wildlife because they're pet rabbits. They don't know how to survive outside. And it isn't legal to dump rabbits outside. And so then I started working on rounding up some of those rabbits and getting them neutered and finding them homes. And then to do that, I created a foster network. And so all of this just grew from my one little bunny and finding my one little bunny a friend. And it grew into this whole little enterprise.
So what is a problem that rabbits face around Easter time?
Every year, thousands of people get rabbits for Easter for their kids as sort of like a toy for Easter. And unfortunately, they get baby bunnies that don't survive. And those poor little rabbits suffer because people haven't done research on how to take care of them before they get the rabbit. They need to know that rabbits are not ideal pets for small children. They need to know that rabbits are not low maintenance, that vet care is expensive. And then always rescue a rabbit. Get a rabbit that needs a home. There's so many rabbits that need homes. But don't ever get a rabbit or any other animal on impulse. Rabbits, chicks, ducks, they all suffer around Easter time because people are not thinking about the animal and they're not thinking about what they're getting into. Some of the hay here for the distribution to our foster homes. Are rabbits the best pet for you? Do you want an animal that's going to guaranteed snuggle with you and lick you and sleep with you? Maybe you want a dog or a cat instead.
So what's the most you've ever had in your house at once?
I don't want to talk about it. We haven't taken the 2019 rabbits. We had a lot. We have a little group of 3 here that they just, you can't probably see them, but they just snuggle all day long and kiss each other and keep each other groomed. There are a few things involved with white bunnies with pink eyes. And the one thing is that a lot of the laboratories and of course the cosmetic companies, they use them for testing. And the reason for that is that they can see the eye. The eyes are more sensitive than other rabbits' eyes. And so they do cosmetic testing on their eyes, which is just awful. And also, the volunteers are nervous about like going out and catching stray rabbits, for example. It's very hard to get volunteers to do that because they're worried about this rabbit hemorrhagic disease and bringing it home.
I'm Jerome Gaw, and I work in mental health as a licensed clinical social worker, and I'm a certified California naturalist and an educational volunteer for conservation. Most of my time I work a regular 40-hour job, and the rest of the time I like going around to see parks and different public open spaces. I got into photography because I was interested in birds and they moved around too quickly, so I wasn't able to figure out a lot of stuff. And I realized I didn't know very much about birds, and the way I figured out to learn more about them was to just have a camera and try to take pictures and look at them later. About a month ago, I found Anna's hummingbird nest, and that was really profound. It was just like a connection to birds. Obviously they live their lives and they're pretty different from us, but in other ways we're still connected. As a nature photographer, I've followed hummingbirds for many years, but what happened this year was completely new to me. One morning in early March, I noticed a small nest in my carport, about 5 feet above the roof of my car. Later that same day, I was thrilled to spot the mother Anna's hummingbird on the nest, looking strong and determined. I was aware that for hummingbirds, the mother handles all of the nesting duties with no help from the father. 28 days after I first saw the mother on the nest, 2 tiny chicks emerged. For the next 2 weeks, I witnessed these 2 siblings grow bigger thanks to the mom's constant attention. Their first juvenile feathers started to grow in, and they ate heartily. Adult hummingbirds spend most of their time alone. Any interactions tend to be competitive, so seeing the 2 siblings interacting with the mother was new and special to me. Before very long, the nestlings started to get too big for the nest. It was funny to see both of them try to squeeze into that small space, creating some sweet moments. I had the great fortune one afternoon of witnessing the mother feeding the chicks. Growing birds need lots of nutrition. I knew they wouldn't be there much longer. And then, one afternoon, I watched the first chick near the nest, testing out her wings. Her flight ability developed quickly, and by the next day, she was off on her own, with a little advice from her mom. The second nestling remained on the nest. From my observation, she appeared healthy and alert and almost ready to fledge. The following afternoon, I got home from work and saw her on the nest. This was only for a brief moment, as she took flight right before my eyes. I liked to pretend she had waited to send me one last goodbye. That was the last I saw of the hummingbirds. Now each morning as I walk down to my car, I look up at this empty nest and imagine two tiny birds discovering everything about their brand new world. And I'm grateful I was able to witness and document it for even just a short time. Yesterday, all my troubles seemed so far away. Now it looks as though they're here to stay. Oh, I believe in yesterday, suddenly. And, you know, one of the things that I think about a lot living in Los Angeles and growing up in Southern California is this intersection between like urban living, city living, and nature. You know, a lot of times we think of those as very separate things, but nature is really all around us. You know, parks like this, places that I go to, they're available to everybody. You know, maybe one of the things that I think is important for us and for just people in general is like this need to be in charge and to control things. And when you're around doing photography, especially with birds and things that move around, is like you don't really control a lot of it. You don't get to decide how this bird is posed or how the light is. You just kind of have to work with what you have and make something out of it. And I think there's a way it's possible to make something good out of something that's not so good. If I didn't believe that, if we didn't believe that, none of us would be here. So I think about holding on to hope and also encouraging other people to do the same. You know, we've been through a lot. Everybody has experienced all kinds of struggles. And so once we acknowledge that and recognize that in one another, then I think we can work together. And again, I think that's the only way. You know, we can't exclude people and say this is only for this type of person or that type. It's for everyone. And we include everyone, we acknowledge everyone, and we encourage them, and we celebrate with them, and we mourn with them. We do everything together as a community. Blue, blue windows behind the stars. Yellow moon on the rise. Like people your generation, maybe a little older also, grew up knowing like diverse people and like learning and understanding like in all your institutions that like it's important to include them and stuff like that, and that we should make space for them. People older than that, like my age and older, kind of didn't really have that unless, well, I mean, I grew up here and I went to UC, and you know, so like I had that, thankfully, but a lot of people my age don't. And so when it's like, oh, well, you have to plan a thing, they don't think about any of that. Like 1 year for Asian Pacific Heritage Month in May, they had an Asian Pacific bird walk. I was like, hey, don't they have that thing? And then I saw it on the social like a week later. They're like, thanks for coming out. I was like, thanks for telling me, dude.
That's
like,
horrible.
You know, you
Yeah.
can't even do one thing.
No, seriously. And that was the right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, and like again, I don't have anything against anybody, but I also understand how people are motivated. I'm a mental therapist, so